My dad said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Don't get too excited, everyone. He fixes machines for a living." He laughed after he said it. That short, flat laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. More like punctuation. Like he'd just made a point that didn't need arguing. I was standing in the doorway of my parents' house with snow still melting on my coat, and half the room turned to look at me, and I just stood there holding a bottle of wine I'd brought as a gesture, feeling the cold come off my sleeves while the warmth of the house pushed back against it. I didn't say anything. I smiled at my dad the way you smile at someone when you've already decided the conversation isn't worth having, and I walked in. My brother's promotion party, that was why we were all there. My brother. Older than me by 4 years. Taller, louder. The kind of man who fills a room not because he's interesting, but because he's certain. He'd just been made regional director at his firm, and my parents had rented a catering company, moved the furniture, put out the good glasses. My mother had her hair done. My dad was wearing the blazer he saved for occasions he considered important. I'd been invited the way you invite someone because not inviting them would create a different kind of problem. I set the wine on the counter near the kitchen and found a spot near the back of the living room. My dad's comment had already dissolved into the noise of the party, people talking, someone near the fireplace laughing too hard at something, and I let it dissolve. I was good at that, 31 years of practice. What my dad didn't know, and what I had no intention of telling him that night, was that 3 weeks earlier, a hospital network in 4 states had signed a contract with my company worth more than he would earn in the next 20 years combined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I had started the company 6 years ago out of a workshop I rented for $400 a month in the back of an industrial park outside Columbus. I built precision components for medical equipment. The kind of small, unglamorous parts that nobody thinks about until a ventilator doesn't cycle correctly at 2 in the morning and someone's father stops breathing. I didn't go to a prestigious school. I had an associate's degree in mechanical engineering technology and a certificate in CAD design that I'd finished online between shifts at the manufacturing plant where I'd worked since I was 22. My family knew I had my own thing. That was how my mother referred to it when the topic came up, which wasn't often. Marcus has his own thing. She said it the way you describe a hobby someone had gotten too serious about. My dad had a more direct version. I fixed machines. To him, that was the whole story, and the whole story was not impressive. My brother wore a suit to work. My brother had a business card with a title on it. My brother played golf with clients and had a company credit card and flew to conferences in cities my dad recognized. I drove a used truck and kept strange hours and talked about tolerances and material fatigue when someone asked what I did. So he fixed machines. I found a glass of something from a passing tray and stood near the bookshelf and watched the party. My mother caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small smile, the one she used when she was hoping everyone would just get through the evening without anything happening. I gave it back to her. We understood each other. My brother was at the center of the room, telling a story I could tell he'd told before because he was hitting his marks too cleanly. His wife was laughing at the right moments. His friends from work clustered around him with that easy comfort of people who already knew where they stood. And then I noticed the man standing near the window. He was somewhere in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who'd been in enough rooms like this to have stopped needing to perform in them. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, not drinking it, just holding it, the way people hold props when they'd rather be somewhere quiet. He was wearing a suit, but not the way my brother wore a suit. My brother wore a suit like a statement. This man wore his like a second skin, something he'd stopped noticing a long time ago. I didn't know who he was. I assumed he was one of my brother's colleagues, someone from the firm. I looked away. About an hour into the party, my dad gathered everyone near the fireplace to say a few words about my brother. He talked about hard work and family pride and the kind of future that was still opening up ahead of a man who made good choices. He did not look at me during this speech, which was fine. I was used to existing in the peripheral vision of my father's pride. After the clapping, people refilled their glasses and the room loosened. I ended up near the kitchen doorway and was talking to my cousin about nothing in particular when my brother materialized at my shoulder. "Hey," he said, "come meet someone." He had his hand on my arm before I could respond. He steered me toward the window, toward the man with the gray hair and the sparkling water. "Dr. Harlan," my brother said. "This is my younger brother, Marcus. Marcus, this is Dr. Harlan." He's the COO of Meridian Health Systems. I felt something shift in the room before I'd fully processed what my brother had said. Dr. Harlan looked at me. Then something behind his eyes moved. A small, precise recalibration, like a lens adjusting. He reached out and shook my hand, and he didn't let go right away. "Marcus Webb," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Of Webb Precision Components. The room wasn't quiet. There were 25 people talking within 30 feet of us. But something about that moment had its own silence built into it. "That's right," I said. Dr. Harlan looked at me for another second with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between recognition and assessment, and something that might have been, if I was reading it right, relief. "Your components are in 11 of our facilities," he said. "The ventilator work your team did on the cycling mechanism redesign, we had a biomed engineer call it the most significant improvement in maintenance reliability he'd seen in a decade." My brother had gone still beside me. "That means a lot," I said. "The team worked hard on that." "The contract we signed last month," Dr. Harlan continued, and now he was speaking at a normal conversational volume, but the words were landing in a spreading radius around us, "is the largest single vendor agreement Meridian has signed with an independent manufacturer in 6 years. I heard my mother make a small sound somewhere behind me. My brother said nothing. Dr. Harlan finally released my hand and looked at me with a different kind of directness. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. Your brother mentioned his family," but he paused in a way that suggested he'd noticed the gap between what my brother had implied and what was standing in front of him. "I've been hoping for an introduction." "Small world," I said. He almost smiled. "Indeed. I became aware, in the way you become aware of temperature change, that the conversation around us had gone quiet. Not completely, but enough. My dad had drifted to the edge of our small circle with his blazer and his good glasses and an expression I had never seen on his face before, a kind of suspended uncertainty, like a man who'd stepped onto ice and wasn't yet sure if it would hold. My brother excused himself to refill his drink. He walked away at a pace that was just barely too fast. Dr. Harlan and I talked for another 20 minutes. He asked good questions, the kind that showed he'd actually read the contract documentation rather than just the summary. We talked about the next phase of the component redesign, about supply chain considerations, about a new product line I was developing that would reduce calibration time on diagnostic imaging equipment by roughly 40%. At some point, I realized my dad was still standing at the edge of the conversation. He hadn't left. He'd been there the entire time. And he was listening. Not speaking, just listening, with his glass held in both hands now, the way a person holds something when they need something to hold. When Dr. Harlan excused himself to make a call, I stood for a moment in the space he left behind. My dad stepped toward me. He didn't say anything right away. He looked at me the way you look at a map when you've just realized you've been reading it wrong, and the place you thought was far away is the place you've been standing the whole time. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. You never said." "No," I said. "I didn't." He looked down at his glass. "How long?" 6 years. Since the workshop on Dugan Street." He was quiet. Outside, through the window, snow was still coming down, white and steady, covering the driveway and the lawn and the row of cars parked along the curb. "I should have asked," he said. "I should have. I didn't ask." There was something in his voice I hadn't expected. Not exactly shame. Something older than shame. Something that had been there a long time and had just now found the surface. Here's where I need to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't what I'd imagined I would feel. In all the years I'd half imagined a moment like this. I had imagined I would feel satisfaction. The clean, complete kind that makes everything that came before it make sense. I had imagined I would feel, at minimum, vindicated, that the word itself would feel like something solid I could stand on. What I actually felt was tired. Not the tired of that specific evening. Something older. The tired of having carried a version of myself into rooms where it was never quite the right version, and having made peace with that, and having built something real in the space that peace left behind. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because the work itself was worth doing. And now the work had walked into the room on its own, and it had been recognized by the right person, and my dad was standing in front of me with his glass in both hands, and all I could think was, this is not the conversation I needed. I stopped needing it a long time ago. But he was still my dad, and he was standing there. You could have told me, he said again, quieter this time. I could have, I said, but I wanted to build it first. I wanted to build it to first. I wanted there to be something real to tell. He nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for and didn't try to name. My mother appeared at his side. She touched his arm and looked at me, and her eyes were bright in the way they got when she was working hard not to cry. I'm proud of you, she said. Simple, no performance in it. Just the words given plainly. Thanks, Mom. My brother came back from the kitchen. He had a fresh drink and a look on his face that I recognized. The look of a man who was doing the math in real time and didn't like the answer he kept getting. He was 3 years older than me, and he'd spent most of those years being the one my parents pointed to when they wanted to point at something. I didn't resent him for it. That would have required me to believe the pointing was accurate. He stopped in front of me. You could have said something, he said. His voice was low, but it had an edge in it. Said what? About the contract. About, he gestured vaguely at the space where Dr. Harlan had been standing. About all of it. You didn't ask, I said. You told him I fixed machines. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. He looked at the floor. He was doing that thing people do when they want to be angry but can't locate the angle from which their anger is justified. After a moment, he looked up. Is it going well? He asked. The company. It was the first time he'd asked me that. In 6 years, it was the first time. Yes, I said, it's going well. He nodded. He took a drink. Good, he said. And the word came out with more effort than it should have, the way you push something heavy through a narrow opening. That's good, Marcus. He walked away. I watched him go when felt something I hadn't expected, something close to compassion. He'd spent years constructing a hierarchy, and I'd spent years not caring about it, and somehow that had hurt him more than it had hurt me. I went and stood by the window for a while. The snow was coming down heavier now. Someone put different music on. The party resumed its normal rhythms around me. Glasses clinking, a burst of laughter from the kitchen, the low hum of conversations I wasn't part of. Dr. Tydeo. Harlan found me again before he left. He shook my hand again and told me his team would be in touch about the imaging equipment project. He said it with the directness of someone who means what they say and doesn't feel the need to underline it. Your family must be proud, he said, and his eyes moved briefly in the direction of my father. Getting there, I said. He almost smiled again. Good evening, Mr. Webb. I left about 40 minutes after that. My dad walked me to the door, something he hadn't done in years. We stood in the entryway while I put my coat on, and he held the door handle and didn't quite open it yet. I want to understand it better, he said. What you do. I want to. If you're willing, I'd like to know more about it. I looked at him. He was older than I usually let myself notice. His hair had gone mostly gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. He was just a man standing in a doorway asking his son for something he should have asked for a long time ago. Yeah, I said. I can do that. He opened the door. The cold came in and the snow was still falling and the driveway was white and quiet. Drive safe, he said. I walked out into it. I sat in my truck for a minute before starting the engine, watching the snow come down against the windshield in the orange light of the street lamps. I thought about the workshop on Dugan Street and the first component I'd ever shipped, a small stainless steel valve assembly for a monitoring device, packed in foam in a flat-rate box, driven to the post office in this same truck. I thought about the first time a biomed tech had emailed me directly, not through a procurement form, just to say that the part had been exactly right and he'd never had to touch it after installation. I thought about what it felt like to make something that worked exactly as it was supposed to work, quietly, without needing to be recognized for it. I thought about what my dad had said, standing in the doorway. I want to understand it better. That was enough. It wasn't everything, and it wasn't what I'd needed years ago when I might have still needed it. But it was real, and it was offered without performance, and standing in a doorway in the snow, it had sounded, for the first time, like the beginning of a different kind of conversation. I started the engine. The snow kept falling. The road was empty. I drove home through the quiet, and the city was still and white around me, and the work was still there waiting, and it had always been enough. I used to think that being unseen by the people who were supposed to know you best was the loneliest kind of invisible. The kind that doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates in the offhand comments, in the way your name gets mentioned last, in the particular tone someone uses when they describe what you do for a living, as if the doing of it already tells them everything they need to know about who you are. My dad wasn't a cruel man. I want to be clear about that. He loved his family in the way a lot of people love, with effort and with blindness, both at once. But for a long time, the version of me he held in his mind was the one that had been formed before I'd done anything worth noticing, and he'd never gone back to update it. That's the thing that happens between parents and children more often than anyone likes to admit. The image gets fixed early, and then the person keeps growing inside it, and nobody mentions the mismatch until something forces the conversation. What I've come to understand is that nothing about that night happened by accident, not in some mystical sense. I don't mean that the universe arranged it. I mean that causes have effects, and the things I had built over 6 years were real, and real things have weight, and weight eventually shows up in the room whether you announce it or not. I didn't go to my brother's party to prove anything. I went because he was my brother and my mother wanted me there. The contract with Meridian existed because my team had done work that was genuinely worth doing. Dr. Trend, Harlan was at that party because my brother had mentioned him as a contact without knowing, or perhaps without fully registering, who I was to him professionally. Every piece of it was already in motion long before I walked through that door. That's the thing about building something with integrity over a long period of time. You don't control when or where it gets recognized. You only control whether the work is real. Marcus had every reason, by the conventional logic of those situations, to feel bitter. Years of being reduced to a punchline in his own family's story. Years of watching a version of himself reflected back that bore almost no resemblance to what he had actually become. And what strikes me, looking back, is that the bitterness never took root, not because he was saintly or indifferent, but because he had been too genuinely occupied with the work to let it. That is its own kind of intelligence, the decision to put your energy into building, rather than into grieving what the building hasn't yet earned you. That decision, made quietly and repeatedly over years, is what character actually looks like from the inside. His father asked, at the end of the evening, to understand it better. 4 words. Late, imperfect, offered in a doorway in the cold, but real. And Marcus said yes. That yes cost him something too. It would have been easier in some ways to carry the distance. Distance, after a long time, becomes familiar, but the decision to remain open to repair, not because the harm didn't happen, not because it was fully accounted for, but because the relationship still had the possibility of becoming something true. That is not weakness. That is the harder kind of strength. The kind that doesn't make noise. What we build in silence and in good faith and without an audience, that is the measure. Not the moment when the room goes quiet. The moment never matters as much as the years that made it possible.